No aid has been allowed into Tigray for 5 days after the announcement of the humanitarian truce. As we continue on for the headlines, the Ethiopian government has troops are seen moving towards Tigray even after an agreed truce. And the Human Rights Council, the Human Rights Concern Eritrea warns mass starvation of Eritrean refugees and the people of Tigray could finally result in thousands of deaths. As we move on to the main stories, the 5 days after the announcement of the humanitarian truce by the Ethiopian government, no aid has been allowed into the Tigray region yet. The Tigray government, in an update issued through its Tigray External Affairs Office, asked the Ethiopian government authorities to live up to their end of their agreement. In the update, the government of Tigray recalled that Abiy Ahmed's regime announced with great fanfare what it called a humanitarian truce to facilitate the flow of aid into the Tigray region. The government of Tigray said it expressed cautious optimism about the announcement despite months of accumulated evidence to the contrary, hoping that the people of Tigray would begin to resolve the humanitarian assistance they need. The statement also noted, quote, although we hope the authorities will break with tradition and honor their promises, we have not seen any encouraging signs that they are about to do so, end quote. Adding in the statement, Abiy Ahmed's regime continues peddle to what is called the fictitious narrative that the government of Tigray was blocking aid delivery to its own people. It added that the regime's officials have made the baseless claim that because of humanitarian convoy movement by land is limited due to the actions of the Tigray forces, the regime has been facilitating aid by air. According to the statement, the Abiy Ahmed regime, along with its local intermediaries in the Afar region, has always been culpable for the obstruction of humanitarian aid delivery into the Tigray region by land. It added that there was no additional food aid delivery by air either. Tigray needs at least 700 truckloads of supplies now a week. The government of Tigray stated that it remains committed to playing a constructive role in helping aid get to the millions of Tigrays that need it, as well as the people in desperate need of humanitarian assistance in the neighboring regions as well. As this truce ongoing, currently peace security expert in East Africa urges for expeditious implementation of the humanitarian truce. Abdullahi Boru Halaki, an expert on the government security and peace in East Africa, highlighted the significance of the humanitarian truce in an interview with South African Broadcasting Corporation. Let's take a listen.
But here is why, for me, having a humanitarian access is a good spot. And some of these, because in all the statements, be it from the State Department, African Union, the final line was, this is a first step towards, an opportunity to have a political settlement. And I think having some of these things be dealt by, if you will, a commission of human rights, that would be an incredible opportunity to be able to deal not just contemporary historical injustices and human rights violations, but also historical ones. South Africans, they have shown the world that it can be done. It's not a panacea, but it really does solve a problem. But that has to come with elite consensus.
Halaki also stressed the need to follow this truce by a peace process accompanied by the accountability and the reconciliation of sustainable peace to materialize immediately.
Because we need those humanitarian access now. Enough number of people are in desperate need of that. Cessation of hostilities, humanitarian access, and then political settlement. And finally, there has to be an accountability that is not only just, but seen to be just, that it can prosecute the violations regardless of which side is involved. Failure, what will happen is that we will have a plastic peace process that largely caters to the demands and the needs of the political elite, practically a political elite's compact. And some of these things will be thrown under the rug. Few years down the road, we will be having this conversation, trying to relitigate not just the violations that have happened before in the 1960s, in the 1970s, 90s, and now. So I think the political elite in the country need not to be let go. And
the peace and security expert said what sort of governance Ethiopia can take has been at the heart of the conflict within Ethiopia, and noted that the devolution of power that had been introduced in the decades after the fall of the military regime served as a pressure valve for many of the tensions within the country. As we move on to the next story, Ethiopian government troops are seen moving towards Tigray after an agreed so-called truce. Sources indicated that 230 buses carrying Ethiopian soldiers and vehicles with heavy military equipment went through Dessie in the direction of Kobo yesterday. The sources said that as part of this amassing of soldiers, more than 150 buses with soldiers were seen today moving through the town of Bati and Afar as well. The Chief of Staff of Ethiopian Army, General Ababaw Taddese, also headed to Asmara after telling the Western Command of the Ethiopian National Defense Force to be ready for a mission. Analysts said the West, that was quick to congratulate Abiy Ahmed for a non-existent humanitarian truce, needs to think quite hard and quick before the lethal toolbox deployed against Tigray expands. Bloomberg also reported Ethiopian troops converged in Kobo, a town near the border of the northern Tigray region, days after the government and Tigray forces agreed to a humanitarian truce after almost 17 months of this ongoing conflict. Kobo's town mayor, Adisu Wadajo, said neither the people nor the regional government has adopted the truce. Bloomberg indicated the possibility that the presence of the additional forces may place the truce at an even more risk. The agreement reached between the federal government and the regional government of Tigray on the 25th of March is the closest the two sides have come to a ceasefire since the hostilities originally erupted in November of 2020. Again, according to Bloomberg, Salamawit Kasa, State Minister of Communications, said the government and the National Risk Disasters Commission were assessing Tigray's needs, but no aid has been shipped off so far. With the humanitarian update and related news, various sources indicated that the Ethiopian government's humanitarian truce was not driven by the humanitarian consideration as it so-called claimed. Timnit Baru presents this report compiled by various sources.
Horn of Africa expert at Queen's University in Canada, Awat Walda Mikhail, told AFP that international diplomatic pressure played a part in the government's decision. Ethiopia is facing economic difficulties due to the war, and negotiations were taking place behind the scenes between belligerents, he disclosed. Diplomatic pressure increased recently, as exemplified in particular by the American Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa, David Satterfield's visit to Ethiopia last week. EthioForum reported, based on diplomatic sources, that the purpose of Satterfield's visit to Mekelle last Thursday was to discuss the implementation of the House of Congress agreement with Tigray officials. Before heading to Mekelle, Satterfield had held discussions with Ethiopian government officials, during which it was agreed both sides would release the declaration of the cessation of hostilities to indicate that it was reached through a joint agreement. However, the Ethiopian government released a statement while the special envoy was returning to Addis Ababa. Anonymous Ethiopian government sources told EthioForum that the government made the announcement 10 hours ahead of the Tigray regional government in order to appear humanitarian in the eyes of the international community, and not to bring the ire of its allies that were repeatedly saying there will not be any negotiations with the Tigray forces. According to the sources, the Ethiopian government wanted to convey the message that the decision was a unilateral initiative and not a negotiated outcome. Eurasia Group think tank also alluded to external loan as another driving factor. It indicated that external loans and expenditure commitments are at their worst for 5 years. According to Linnea Lafort, independent researcher and specialist in the Horn of Africa, these pressures also come at a time when Ethiopia is experiencing one of its worst food crises in decades, with nearly 30% of its population in need of food aid. Ethiopia cannot cope with its food crisis without international aid, he said. Lafort later expressed his disappointment on Twitter. I was too optimistic, or perhaps simply too rational. All available information points to a huge military mobilization on the part of Addis Ababa, and absolutely nothing about the possible opening of humanitarian roads, he wrote. Horn of Africa analyst Rashid Abdi tweeted, he was not surprised Abiy Ahmed wanted war. Humanitarian truce to camouflage his military plans. He recently rearmed. He wants blood. Watch out for another Northern Command type of casus belli. Abiy Ahmed never tells truth. Deception, not tactical, it's strategic, Rashid tweeted. President of the Amhara regional state, Yilkal Kafale, last week said the plan to finish the war has been going on.
መከላከያ በራሱ ዕቅድ አካቶ እንዲተገብረው አቅጣጫ ተቀምጧል።
Some of it can't be told here, but the plan to finish the war has been going on, and the Ethiopian National Defense Force is working on it. Pre-war preparation must be high. The Ethiopian National Defense Force is in training, reorganizing, and strengthening. Amhara is building a huge army. The Ethiopian government has made the truce conditional on the withdrawal of the Tigray forces from the areas they occupy in the Amhara and Afar regions. As for the government of Tigray, it has agreed to cease hostilities on the condition that aid arrives in Tigray. Afar Regional President Awol Arba, on his part, threatened to block the humanitarian aid to Tigray through its region. Abala Maqala Road is like Tigray's only eye. He who has one eye does not play with the dust. The road of the Sardo area is their oxygen. We will not allow aid to enter into Tigray unless they leave the land they have invaded. A U.S. bill authorizing targeted sanctions in Ethiopia but also limiting aid from international financial institutions or the U.S. development agencies is being closely scrutinized in the country. A man widely considered to be a close confidant of Abiy Ahmed also disclosed on Isa television that Ethiopia's unilateral truce was declared to deceive Western governments and prevent the enactment of H.R. 6600. Observers say the rapid restoration of basic services, electricity, telecom, banks in Tigray, as well as the removal of the TPLF from the list of terrorist groups, will be a test of the goodwill of the Ethiopian government. Lead Republican in the House Foreign Affairs Committee Michael McCall released a statement saying that the actions taken to operationalize humanitarian truce must be judged in the coming days, not weeks. He added Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and his government, as well as the regional authorities in Afar and Amhara, must immediately restore communication and banking services and continuously and proactively facilitate trucks of food, fuel, and medicine supplies into Tigray.
Thank you, Timnington. Welcome back. You're still tuned into our daily English news. The UN says at least 115 children are severely malnourished in the blockaded Tigray region of Ethiopia. The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, in its latest situational report, said the humanitarian situation in Tigray is worsening day by day. On Monday, WHO Organization Director General Tedros Adhanom said the situation could be worse than the estimated as the world moves on from the conflict to other global issues. The WHO chief stated that the humanitarian and health amid aid must be given safe passage to reach the people in Tigray who have been under blockade for over a year. Food, health care, and basic human rights and services are completely blocked off, as said Dr. Tedros in his speech. Human rights concern Eritrea warns mass starvation of Eritrean refugees and the Tigrayan people could result in thousands and thousands of deaths. Human rights concern Eritrea said Eritrean refugees in Mai'ani and Adi Harush camps in Tigray region, northern Ethiopia, are dying from hunger and hunger-related diseases caused by the blockage. It indicated that no food rations have been allowed to reach them for over 2 months, and that the people, particularly children, are dying from malnutrition-related illness at a quick rate. It added that the refugees do not have sufficient drinking water and there are no medicines or medical care available to them. According to the statement, Ethiopia's blockade and its refusal to allow aid convoys to reach Tigray are responsible for the mass starvations, not only in the refugee camps, but also across the entire region. It also noted that most starvations of the civilian population appears to be a war strategy by the Ethiopian authorities. The controversy and the contravenes of the international treaties governing the treatment of the refugees and civilians in war zone, as it underlined. Human rights concern Eritrea calls upon the government of Ethiopia, and in particular the Prime Minister himself, to head the urgent warnings of the UNHCR concerning the imminent danger of mass starvation and deaths in the camps in the entire region of Tigray. It also called for urgent temporary ceasefire, for an immediate step to allow large quantities of food and medical supplies to be taken into Tigray and to the refugee camps as well as the civilian population as whole. Human rights concern Eritrea called on all members of states in the United Nations to put diplomatic pressure on Abiy Ahmed's government to implement these actions immediately. More than 25,000 Eritrean refugees currently live in Mai'ani and Adi Harush refugee camps in the Tigray region. That concludes our news for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Bye-bye.